Hi, everybody. This is Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today, I have a large layout chair for you. All of these layouts were created using the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I'm going to show you all of the layouts that I made for My Creative Scrapbook over the last year. If you like brands like Prima and 49 and Market and Simple Stories, you might want to consider subscribing to the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I will put the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website in the description box. So let's get started right in. I'm going to show you my latest layouts first, and then I'll work backwards to the ones I created in March of last year. The first set of layouts I'm going to show you are from the current February kit. For this layout, I used some dies and I cut out a whole bunch of hexagons. And then for the background, I used some sprays and modeling paste. I have a whole bunch of fussy cut items on this page and then some die cuts as well. And then I added some jewels to the centers of the hearts and the butterflies just to give a little sparkle to the layout. For this layout, I used a large triangle and then a smaller one in opposite corners. I have a really large cluster here where I combined a lot of die cut pieces and fussy cut pieces and then a few die cuts that I cut out. And then in either corner, I used some of the gorgeous dimensional flowers from Prima that were in the kit. And then I have a mixed media background on this one as well. Once again, I used some sprays and modeling paste to create this background. For this layout, I used one of the many cut files that are available free to My Creative Scrapbook subscribers. I did some stitching on my cut file. And then I have some modeling paste in the background. I used, once again, the dimensional flowers to create some clusters along with some die cuts, fussy cut pieces, and some die cuts, once again, that I cut out to add a little bit of extra interest to the page. To make this layout, I once again used one of the free cut files. I believe both of these cut files are from Pear Tree Cut Files. For this layout, I once again did some stitching on the cut file, and then I layered up a number of punched hearts to create a little bit of dimension over here. I used a lot of die cuts in the background. Those are from the kit. And then there were a number of butterflies that were the same but in different sizes, so I layered those up, once again creating a little bit of dimension on the page. For this layout, I used my dies and I cut out some triangles. I once again used some sprays and modeling paste in the background. I used the dimensional flowers and then a number of the die cut and fussy cut flowers from the kit. I also used some fussy cut birds. I just love these little birds, so I have one in each corner. And then here I have a chipboard stack of letters with a ribbon over it. This next group of layouts was created using the January kit. This first layout was made using a cut file. I just simply stitched along the inside of the cut file. I like stitching. I think it gives the layouts a little bit more texture and interest. In addition to the cut file, I have some large clusters made with flowers and die cuts. And then I also have some smaller ones too, made with some of the tinier flowers from the kit. And then I used some gold embossing powder to emboss this beautiful piece of chipboard at the top, and then I embellished it with a number of tiny pearls. And then so that there would be some gold elsewhere on the layout, I added some gold branches to my clusters. This layout was made using this really gorgeous cut file, again, one of the free cut files. And then after I backed it, I stitched it and then added a number of gold pearls to it. I have some clusters with some of the dimensional flowers, and then I have a cluster in each corner with some of the die cuts and some other elements from the kits. I included lots of butterflies with pearls in the centers. And then this was from my stash, this word awesome, which I thought went well with all the other gold elements on the page. I once again used a cut file for this layout. I have some mixed media in the background, and I used the stencil from the kit. I did some stitching on the cut file. I really loved this cut file because I loved the option of being able to put some photos in the windows. I thought that was a really cute idea. And then I guess I could have put one in the door too. I used some of these pretty flowers. I use a little bit of gesso on them to give them some highlights. And then I have some other smaller clusters around the page. For this layout, I used some inked strips of paper to create a diagonal going across the page. I was using the monthly sketch that was created by Rebecca Moore. I have my clusters of flowers, and then I also used some chipboard pieces that were in the kit. I love these beautiful butterflies, and then I used jewels to embellish them a little bit. I also have some tags up here at the top with some bows from my stash. Now we move on to some Christmas layouts. These were all made using the December kit. This is a beautiful Prima collection. I love the way they use these non-traditional colors for their Christmas collections. I have a lot of fun working with those colors. For this layout, I used a cut file that I stitched with some pink thread, and then to create the trees, I cut out some large triangles, and then I layered them with some inked strips of pattern paper. In the background, I used a lot of sprays, and then I also used a star stencil with some embossing powder. For my photo, I used a die cut, and then I put some jewels all around my photo and a little bow that I also placed a jewel on. And then I love this little Santa over here with his pink hat. For this layout, I used some torn papers to back this large cut file. I stitched around the edge of this one as well, and then behind it, I placed some gold paper to make the cut file pop off the page a little bit. I love these beautiful flowers, the gold poinsettias and the pink flower, and so I used them in two different places on the layout, creating some clusters. I love these little gingerbread men, so I wanted to have them peeking out from behind the cut file. And then I used some die cuts and fussy cut pieces in some other areas. For this layout, I once again used a cut file. This time I used some silver thread for some stitching. I love these banners, so I included them in two places on the layout and added some jewels just to add a little bit of emphasis to them. And then I added some die cuts all around the page. To create this layout, I used the stencil from the kit to add some texture to the pattern paper in the background. To create the circle, I used a scoring board, and then I layered some pattern paper on top of this edge. And then I used these beautiful Prima flowers. I just think these are so gorgeous with the gold edges, and some fussy cut pieces and some die cuts to create these two large clusters. These layouts were made using the November kit, which featured the gorgeous 49 and Market Christmas collection from this year. Now, nothing to do with the papers or the kit. I was just having some major scrapbookers block when I was trying to create these layouts, and I had a lot of half-finished layouts. I wasn't sure I was going to come out with any layouts at all that I was happy with, but luckily I was at a retreat and I was able to keep working on my layouts until they came together. But in the end, I actually made 6 layouts just because I had so many ideas that finally came together. For this first layout, I used a strip of 3 photos of my daughter, Julia, and then I layered that on top of this pattern paper that has this poinsettia in the upper right-hand corner. So to balance that out, I fussy cut out this poinsettia for the lower left-hand corner with all these beautiful holly leaves and berries. And then I used some mixed media in the background. I have some sprays, some stamping, and then I also used the stencil from the November kit. For the title, I used one of the rub-ons. I love having rub-ons. And then I also included a number of other die cuts in a couple of other places on the page. For this layout, I used one of the cut files. I backed it with a pattern paper. I did some stitching, and then I love these ornaments. They look so dimensional, so I added those to the cut file as well. At the top, I have some punched out border strips. I punched one out of pattern paper and then one out of black cardstock to make the border pop a little bit. And then I used this door die cut as a focal point, and I surrounded it with lots of Christmas florals. And then I added a couple of these white pine branches from my stash. For this layout, I cut a swoop out of this green pattern paper. I once again used the stencil from the kit to add these poinsettias. I used some mixed media in the background. And then here I have my title with a number of die cuts. Next, I have this layout that I use a large border punch and then a smaller border punch to make. I also included a really thin strip of striped paper. I think striped paper makes really nice accent strips. On top and below the photo, I have a number of die cuts. I included this little red bow, and then I also love this Santa. For this layout, I use a number of strips of paper, and then I created this triangle at the top. I used the stencil once again in the background with some modeling paste. In the bottom, I have this torn piece of paper. I have started to tear paper and layer it on top of my layouts rather than tearing a piece out because I've had some disasters when I do that. This is a little safer. I use these beautiful poinsettias. I love the gold beads in the center. I have one in my title cluster over here that has a number of die cuts, and then I also used one over here with some more poinsettia die cuts, and then I added these die cuts from my stash for a finishing touch. And then for this layout, I used a number of elements that I had tried to use on some other pages. They didn't quite come together, but luckily I was able to use the kit to put together one final layout. So I made these corner pieces, so I put one in each corner, and then I used this cut file. I backed it with the pattern papers and then also with an old Christmas card that has a lot of gold sparkle to it. And then I added some jewels on top of that. I used the rub-ons for the title on this layout, and then I created a small cluster with some presents and a bow at the top of the layout. These layouts were made using the October kit. In this kit, we got some gorgeous pattern papers, many of them from 49 and Market. I used two of the papers in the kit, and then I used a very large doily. I have some distressed papers behind my photo, and then I used a whole bunch of die cut and fussy cut embellishments that I made into a number of clusters. For this layout, I used a lot of gesso and white paint on the background. I did some stenciling. I arranged all of my embellishments in a diagonal, and then I have these two clusters in opposite corners. I have some of the dimensional flowers, and I loved these frames that were included in the kit. They came in a couple of different colors. I really liked the blue one. I have a whole bunch of splatters on the background too. For this layout, I used very few pattern papers, if any. I have a mixed media background. I have lots of sprays, stamping, and modeling paste. I love this particular die cut piece. I cut it in half and used half on the two clusters, or used half on each of the two clusters on this layout. And then I used a whole bunch of ephemera and die cut pieces, and then I did some embossing on this chipboard. For this layout, I used a number of triangles that I cut out using some dies that were in my stash. And then I added these two circular photos. I put some pearls around the outside of the photos. This one needs a bit of a repair. This one stayed intact. And then I use, again, the die cuts and the dimensional flowers from the kit. And then I love adding butterflies, if you haven't noticed, and I added some pearls in the centers for a little bit of extra embellishment. And then finally, this layout. This probably isn't my favorite layout that I ever made, but I am still happy to have this photo scrapbooked and ready to go in my album. So I used some dies and I cut out a whole bunch of triangles. I layered some cardstock, just regular cardstock triangles on top of each other, and then I put the pattern paper at the very top, and then I have a flower cluster on either side of the photo, and then some more distressed papers behind the photo. These layouts were created using the September kit. In this kit, we received a gorgeous collection from 49 and Market called Sunburst. I think it's one of my favorite collections, not only because it's summer or tropical themed, and I love creating summer layouts, but also because of all the bright, beautiful colors that it has. So this very first layout, The Ocean is Calling, was made using a cut file. For the waves, I backed them with all different shades of blue pattern papers. For the letters, I chose a paper that had type on it, and then I used distress oxides to change the color. I have some clusters of different sizes. I use tropical flower die cuts, some starfish, some flamingos, a seahorse, and I combine those elements to create the clusters. I use some distress papers behind the photo, and then in the background I use some white embossing powder through a stencil to create some sunbursts. I also use the stencil from the kit and some distress oxides to add a faint hint of some suns in the background. For this layout, I used some embroidery floss in lots of different colors to highlight this sunburst. I have two main clusters. I have some die cuts, some dimensional flowers, and some jewels mixed in with these. Here's my title along with two beautiful butterflies, and then at the bottom of the page I have this really cool curved banner along with another little butterfly. For this layout, I again used a cut file. In the background, I have a lot of stencil work along with some stamping. I have my two main clusters that include some flowers and some starfish. I also have some die cuts mixed in. I have these really cute turtles, two littler ones at the top, and then a large one on the lower right-hand corner. For this layout, I started out by painting this seahorse pink, and then I layered this blue seahorse on top of it, and then I began creating my clusters. I have, once again, the dimensional flowers, and then I have these die-cut tropical flowers, some shells. I also loved this laser-cut netting. I have that in the three clusters. And then on this layout, I also wanted to add this really cute turtle. These layouts were made using the August kit, in which we received a number of papers and embellishments from Prima Marketing. I used some of the pattern papers to create some layered strips on either side of the photo. I also used some strips of paper to create kind of a lattice look in the background. And then I fussy cut this frame out of one of the pattern papers and added some pearls and a piece of chipboard. On the bottom of the layout, I have a number of fussy cut flowers with a bird layered on top, some other clusters of flowers. Those are the same fussy cut flowers. And then on the top, I have this fountain with the very tiny title that says, "Adore You." For this layout, I used one of the cut files, and then I also used some of the chipboard that we received. I heat embossed it with some white embossing powder, and then I decorated it with a number of pearls in different sizes. I used a border punch, and then I also folded this paper to create a place for my photo and for the cut file, and then I added a few flowers and then a few embellishments. For this layout, I once again folded some paper. I used a scoring board in order to create this effect, and then I layered a punched out border on top of it. In the center, I cut my photo into an oval, and then I decorated it on two sides with these really pretty flowers, and then I added some leaves and this fleur-de-lis, which I decorated with some pearls. For this layout, I used a different border punch quite a few times on the layout, and then I cut some rosettes in half. I lined them along the bottom and along the top, and then I used these beautiful pattern papers and some more little frames, and then I added just a couple of embellishments and a piece of chipboard at the top and at the bottom. And this one is called Cherished Moments. This is a piece of chipboard. These layouts were made using the July kit, which also featured a Prima collection. This one was quite tropical. There were a lot of pinks in it, and I really enjoyed working with it. So for this first layout, I used my gel plate and I created this piece of paper. I wanted there to be a lot of texture, and I wanted to have some yellow for the sun. And then I layered the title on top. I used one of the pattern papers to back it. And then I have my two photos over here in the corner and added a whole bunch of embellishments. Some of them are die cuts and some of them were fussy cut out. For this layout, I once again used a cut file and I did some stitching as you've seen before on the outside of it. I did some heat embossing for the sun, and then I used these flowers to make two large clusters. I have some die cuts and pearls on the clusters, and you could see that I did some work with a stencil and modeling paste on this part of the cut file. For this layout, I again used a cut file and this really pretty background paper. I loved all of the florals and the wood grain on that background paper. I did a lot of stitching, of course, and then I added the flowers with the really pretty gold centers, and I tucked them into the cut file. I added some more die cuts all around the edge of the cut file and also around my photos. Then for this layout, I made a mixed media background on a piece of cardstock, and then I mainly used the embellishments that we received with a couple of die cuts that I added from a die that I had in my stash. These layouts were made using the June kit. This had a collection in it from 49 and Market, and when I first looked at the collection, I liked it, but I didn't realize how much I was going to grow to love it as I worked with it. This first layout was made using a cut file. I cut it out very large, and then I used some strips of paper to back the G and the arrow in the O, and then I used another pattern paper to back the rest of the O. I have some strips of paper on the top and the bottom of the page, and then 49 and Market often includes lots of tickets, so since this was travel themed, I used them on the lower right hand side and the upper left hand side of the cut file. For this layout, I used one of the pattern papers in the background, and then I created this circle. I used some sprays and some modeling paste. I arranged all of these houses around the top of the circle, and then I have a number of banners over here to the left of the photo. For this layout, I again used a cut file. I love all of these arrows. I backed the cut file with some blue and orange pattern papers. I used one of the pattern papers in the background, and then I added a number of the floral pieces with some branches. For this layout, I used some modeling paste on one of the pattern papers that we received. I used some of the rub-ons around the edge of the page, and then I ripped a piece of paper and layered it on top. I added some of the flowers around this little cluster and over here in the lower left-hand side of the photo, and then I used some banners and some more embellishments, including a tag with a little bit of twine on it. These layouts were created using the May kit. The May kit had a collection from Prima that had some really bright colors, as you could see, with some silver foiling. For this layout, I used a piece of navy blue cardstock and a free cut file, which I backed with some pattern papers and then stitched in different colors. For the border, I used a number of small strips of paper, and then I added some of the flowers right below my two photos, and then I added a couple of embellishments and this beautiful butterfly along with some splatters in the background. For this layout, I also used some strips of paper. These are a little bit thicker, and then I arranged them on angles around this white square in the center of my layout. I have my photo backed with a pattern paper. I used a paper punch to create a little bit of texture back here, and then of course I have some clusters with the florals, and I have this title, which is "You Are Some Kind of Wonderful." For this layout, I again used one of the cut files, which I did a lot of stitching on. I used some Prima jewels that I thought added a lot of nice sparkle to the cut file. I have my two photos and then a whole bunch of embellishments going around the outside edge of the large circle, including this really pretty butterfly. And then I added a few of these jewels to add just a little bit more sparkle to the page. For this layout, I cut out the center of this wreath and I wove some paper just to give the inside of the wreath a little bit of texture. I added a whole bunch of embellishments, which I layered on top of the wreath that was already there. And then I added a bow, a piece of chipboard, and two pretty butterflies. These layouts were made using the April kit. In that kit, we received a collection from Simple Stories that has lots and lots of bright colors together with some black, and I love that color palette. I think it's really fun to work with. For this first layout, I used some sprays and modeling paste in the background using the stencil that we got. I also added a few black splatters. And then I have this piece of pattern paper going across the page with a border punch along the edge. I have these two large banners and then a circle. And then I added this chipboard piece that says "Just Be You." And then I decided to also add a title over here, "Beautiful Life." I love the way these different color pearls go so nicely with all the bright colors on the page. And then of course there were lots of butterflies in this collection, so I used plenty of them on my page. For this layout, I did something that I really love to do, which is cut out shapes from cardstock and pattern paper and then put a mixed media background behind them. There are just limitless possibilities for this type of layout. I inked the edges of all of these hexagons with some distress ink, and then I have some sprays, some stamping, and some splatters in the background. I added some embellishments. I have some butterflies. I have the title that says "Life is Beautiful," and then I also added some bees all around the outside. For this layout, "Time to Bloom," I used a cut file, And then I also used this piece of paper that was in the kit. This is from 49 and Market. It was a great complement to the Simple Stories collection. I added some splatters, and then I simply tucked my photo and a number of embellishments all around the cut file. I have a few butterflies on this layout as well. And then I used this branding strip on the bottom along with a punched out border. And it looks like we have a stray pearl over here. For this layout, Happy Spring, I did the same thing that I did on one of the other layouts where I cut out the center of a wreath. I put some pink paper behind it, and then I added a whole bunch of embellishments all around the outside of the wreath. I used the cut file as the title, and then I decorated the layout with more butterflies. There are lots of them on this layout as well. And then finally, this layout, Happy Little Moments, was made using a cut file. Unfortunately, when I made the offset, I didn't realize that the inner cuts didn't also have an offset. So for some reason, I didn't notice that until it was all assembled, but I decided that I was just going to be happy that I had a completed page. And now I've learned how to make sure that I have my inner cuts so that this doesn't happen again. This is the last little stack of layouts that I have to show you in this video. These layouts were made using the March kit, in which we received a collection from 49 and Market that had a country theme to it. For this first layout, I used a cut file. I backed it with some pattern papers. I did some stitching. I did some stenciling and used some modeling paste. And then I added the beautiful flowers. I know I say they're beautiful all the time, but they are really beautiful. I do love those. They're one of my favorite things about the kits. I also added some fussy cut and die cut elements in a couple of different spots around the page. And then, of course, I added a lot of butterflies. For this layout, I used some strips of paper, and then I used these lace embellishments that were part of the laser cut pack we received. I added some geese in a couple of areas, and then I loved this combination of red and yellow flowers. I used some dies to cut out the title, and I added an embellishment to the title cluster. For this layout, I used another cut file, backed it with some red and white paper, and then for these parts of the cut file that were white, I used some embossing folders to give them texture, and then I added a number of florals and die cut pieces all around the cut file. And then finally, I made this layout using some elements that I fussy cut out of one of the pattern papers. I made a mixed media background using sprays and the stencil that we received. And then I made this small title cluster over here. And then on this layout, instead of having butterflies, I have lots and lots of little bees. That's everything that I have to show you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I want to say thank you so much for sticking with me until the end of the video. Many of these layouts have process videos up on my channel. If you have any questions about anything at all that you saw on this video, I'll be happy to answer them. Just leave me a comment. I hope that you have a fantastic day. I hope you find some creative time very soon, and I hope to see you back on my channel again soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.